We're talking about emergency funds, what they are and why they're important. So, first things first, an emergency fund, what that actually means is you have an account specifically for emergencies. And a lot of people will ask me, hey, Jake, what do you consider an emergency? And I think I have a good system for thinking about if it's an emergency or not. So the first thing that I think about if this is an emergency or not is I think, is this above and beyond what I normally have in my bank account as a buffer? So if you're following any sort of a system, hopefully you're following mine because I think it's the best. But if you're following any type of system that has operating expenses coming out of one account, just operating expenses, hopefully you have a buffer in there. What I mean by buffer is you have at least enough for your normal bills, but you also have a little bit more in that account. That way you never have overdrafts, you never get hit with a minimum account balance fee, stuff like that. And so if it's above your buffer number, right? And also it's as a result of something out of your control, or it's just a big expense that you weren't ready for, you didn't know that was going to happen, right? It's unexpected. Then I look at that as okay, that could be considered an emergency. Why that's important is if you're going to have an emergency fund, you don't want to be spending that money on a bunch of things that aren't emergencies. I know it seems like pretty simple, but I mean, you'd be surprised at how many people are like, hey, I'll just take this money that I've been saving for weeks, months, years, and I'll spend it on, a new car or whatever it is. Um, that doesn't necessarily need to be an emergency because you knew it was going to be coming up. You know what I mean? So it's not just something that you are going to have to pay for, even if that's a necessity. It's something that's unexpected, right? That's what I consider an emergency. So, um, I think that every kind of financial plan starts with some type of saving. So, what I recommend is that you start with a 1 month emergency fund. 1 month of living expenses is how I look at it. So, living expenses doesn't mean I'm eating out every day. I'm ordering DoorDash. I'm Ubering downtown to go party. I'm spending on drinks and nights out. I'm not thinking like that. I'm thinking baseline expenses. If there was, a situation where you didn't have income coming in, and you absolutely needed to cut your essentials down to the bare bones. What's the least amount of groceries that you could pay for, the least amount of insurance or rent or all that stuff, right? The bare bones necessities. If I didn't leave my lights on every single day when I left the house, like that's what I'm looking at when I'm looking at a 1 month emergency fund. And I always say that's the starter, or that's the prerequisite to kind of starting a financial plan is, hey, I'm going to start with saving a 1 month emergency fund. Can't get to 2 months or 3 months or 4 months or 5 months or 6 months if you don't start with one. So why do most people not have an emergency fund? Well, it's because they're not looking at what they're spending first and foremost, and they're not building a buffer or kind of a what am I thinking of? There's not a gap between how much they're making and how much they're spending. So if you look at the majority of Americans, right, they don't have a 1 month emergency fund, or I'm sorry, they don't have $1,000 to to spend on some type of emergency. I've seen stats that most Americans, I think it's like 60% or something, don't even have $400 for an emergency expense. And that would make sense why a lot of people have credit card debt. Average credit card debt in a household is like 10K or something like that, right? In debt, high interest debt, terrible. So most people live in paycheck to paycheck. They don't really have a gap between how much they're making and how much they're spending every month. So very difficult to save. I think the average savings rate is somewhere around 4%. That's like nothing, right? Like, that's barely beating inflation. So in terms of like percentage. So I I think the first goal for someone who's trying to get their financial life on track is, one, you need to start tracking your spending, right? Tracking your money, what's coming in, what's going out, how much of a buffer do I have, or how much of a gap do I have between what I'm making and what I'm spending, and how can I change those numbers? If it's right, even I'm making this much, I'm spending the exact same amount, or even worse, I'm spending more. What do I need to do? Do I need to make more? Do I need to save more or spend less? Do I need to make more or spend less? Those are two things you can do right away. Um, People will swear that you can't, but it's like you didn't need DoorDash yesterday, right? You could have made a sandwich. So, I mean, it's really pretty simple. You can always, in every situation I've ever seen, you can always spend less. I know you don't want to, but you can. All right. So, once you get this habit of spending down, once you start spending less than you make, you can start building up this emergency fund. Like I said, 1 month is your first go to. Then what I would do is take care of any high interest debt. That's the only thing that I think is more important than building up a huge emergency fund, is getting rid of high interest debt. Only because it's taking so much money away from you to have high interest debt, like credit cards, for instance. Let's say you have a credit card payment of, you know, whatever the payment is, but you have credit card debt and your interest rate is 20% or higher. You're losing 20% on that money, whatever your debt number is. So the average household has like 10K. That means you're losing 20% on top of that every single month. That's horrible. So you're just draining your account. So high interest debt needs to be taken care of. High interest debt, I typically look at anywhere around 5% or higher is going to get into high debt territory. A lot of financial advisors and stuff, which I am not one, by the way, um, think around 6 to 7% high interest. I just think, hey, anything over 5%, I'm looking at as high interest debt. I want to get rid of that. So, how much should you save once you have a 1 month emergency fund and you've taken care of your high interest debt? I would say anywhere from 3 to 6 months is going to be pretty good for most people. That's going to be good for almost everyone. Um, but a lot of factors can change that, and you may want more or less depending on your particular circumstance. So, what kind of circumstances I'm talking about? Well, your income stability is one of them. Um, if you have a job that's super susceptible to changes in the market, if you have a job that's not super stable, for instance, if you're working in like a company that's a startup, or a company that's like has a very high um, turnover rate, because of how they're ambitious they are, or just because of the sector that you're in. Typically, this is in the private sector. Um, then you may want more of an emergency fund, because you might find yourself in a situation where, to no fault of yourself, sometimes you may get let go. You may find that the company does a restructuring and gets rid of a bunch of people. That happens a lot, right? even with some really good engineers or financial analysts, whatever it is that you're doing, you might be really good at it. You might be doing your job well, and the company that you're working for still may fire you or let you go or whatever, and you can't rely on like severance packages and stuff like that to keep you afloat. So you may need more of an emergency fund. Maybe you're more towards that 6 month number than the 3 month number in terms of having a very safe um, emergency fund, right? So um, when it comes to what that emergency fund actually is, like I said, we take that bare bones number of how much it would take to run your household over the course of a month, and that's your 1 month emergency fund. Just multiply that by 3 or 6, and you'll get your fully funded emergency fund. So we're not talking about, again, eating out. We're not talking about going out and having fun. We're not talking about any of that. Just bare bones essentials. Housing, whether you're renting or your mortgage or whatever. Your car, if you have a car payment, wouldn't recommend it. But if you have a car payment, if you have insurance, those things need to be paid, right? So those are your bare bones expenses. Uh, where should you keep this money? Oh, and by the way, if you're like running your own business or something like this, and this is speaking to my entrepreneurial people, hey, if you have your own business, that's incredibly risky compared to uh, a job or a sector that you're working in where there's multiple jobs available. So you may want, 9 months of emergency expenses, or maybe even 12 months. In certain situations, you may want 12, depending on where you're at. Um, Especially if you're leaving a job to start a business, I always recommend that you build up a certain amount of investing funds and emergency funds before you make a jump like that. But hey, if the bottom line is, the more risky your situation is, the more emergency savings you should probably have, in my opinion. So 3 to 6 months for most people, maybe up to 9, maybe up to 12 for some business owners or people in the private sector who are not as uh, you know sure of their future when it comes to those companies they work for. Where should I keep this money? So this is probably going to be a significant amount of your net worth for a long period of time until you're investing significantly. So with an emergency fund, I always think any cash on hand, no matter what the goal is for that cash, I should keep at least in a high yield savings account. What's a high yield savings account? It's basically an account with either an online bank, or I believe some credit unions have some pretty high yield savings accounts. Wherever the interest rate is, or I'm sorry, wherever the what am I thinking? The yield. I can't even think right now. Wherever the yield is going to be higher on that money that you're getting for holding it in that bank, that's a high yield savings account. It's an account that's giving you a bigger return than your brick and mortar bigger banks like Chase, American Express, or not Chase, Bank of America, uh, any of those other banks like that with brick and mortars, Wells Fargo, things like that. They're going to give you like 0.02% on your money in most cases, in any savings account there. So you're pretty much not getting anything, and your cash is becoming less and less valuable over the course of time because of inflation. So what's going to keep you above that inflationary number and keep your cash actually growing in terms of your ability to use it to buy things, right? You want to at least keep your money in a high yield savings account. So, a few places you can keep it. I'm not sponsored by any of these, but I really like Betterment. Betterment's cool. You can open a few different accounts with them. They have some really cool icons that you can put over the accounts, and you can name it whatever you want. Those things are important to me, so I like Betterment. Wealthfront's another good one. SoFi is another good one. There's tons of other ones. Capital One has a good high yield savings account. The yields for all of those is around 3% or so right now. It's been up to as high as 5%. You can chase the highest percentage if you want to. Um, I mean, it doesn't matter so much to me. At least, at least if it's beating inflation, I know that that's so much better than just keeping your money in a brick and mortar or in actual physical cash. That's crazy, right? You put it under your bed, you're losing buying power on that money consistently. So your emergency fund should always go into a high yield savings account, in my opinion. Um, so the biggest thing, and this is a little bit contrary to what I'm saying with the high yield savings stuff. Remember, putting your money in a high yield savings account, keeping it above an inflationary percentage, that's not because I want to make like a ton of money on this. This money is not to make money, right? Your emergency fund is not an investment. That's a big distinction you have to understand, right? Whenever you're keeping money on hand for emergencies. It's not there because you're going to go crazy with interest on your savings account. It's not there so that you can put it into other investments. Your emergency fund is simply there for emergencies. It's for peace of mind. It's to look at your bank account and say, okay, if I have this money here, at least I know I'll be okay if X, Y, and Z pops up. You know, if your car uh, runs over a nail and you pop a tire, a smaller emergency, but it's unexpected, and you may not have the cash on hand or as a buffer in your checking account in order to pay for that. So you have an emergency fund that can take care of it. You know, even up to bigger things. Your whole car explodes. Hopefully, you don't explode in it. But let's say your head gasket goes out. That's going to be an issue. You're probably going to need another car. So that's an emergency, right? So you're going to have a bunch of these emergencies that pop up over the course of your life. And having that emergency fund, if nothing else, gives you like some mental de stressing. And I think that's super important. So, um, my kind of closing thought on this is an emergency fund isn't going to make you rich, um, but it could help you not to be broke, if that makes sense. Um, it could save you from making bad decisions, right? It could save you from staying at a place that you don't want to stay at. It could give you some level of financial freedom or some level of um, an ability to leave a place that you don't want to be at anymore. Because I would be much more willing to take a bigger risk towards a goal of mine or somewhere where I want to go, if I have that buffer or have that stash of cash piled up for those emergencies. I know that if I get fired from a place, I know that if I, fail in my business, I know that if any of these things happen, I at least have some cash reserve saved up and off to the side, not to be touched for any dumb reasons. Um, I know that I'll be good for at least 3 to 6 to even to 9 or 12 months, in certain cases. So that's what an emergency fund is for. Hopefully, you guys are building your own emergencies or your own emergency funds. And I'm really curious to know, what your emergency fund looks like, what your philosophy on emergency savings is. Are you cash heavy? Do you like to invest more and save less or keep less cash on hand for different reasons? What does your emergency fund look like? Let me know down in the comments, and I'll see you next time on our Money Talks uh, podcast style conversations.